Hi, this is Tom Scherberger, former host of WMNF's Wavemakers. I hope you'll join me for the launch of a new in-person speaker series called Wavemakers Live. I'll be your host for lively conversations with people making a difference around Florida and Tampa Bay. We kick things off August 21st with WMNF's own Nadine Smith. You know Nadine as the host of the Wide Awake America Public Affairs Show, but she's also the co-founder of Equality Florida, where she's been fighting for equal rights for 30 years and was one of Time Magazine's 100 most influential people in the world. We'll talk about how the right-wing agenda nationally has its roots in Florida and how Florida can provide a blueprint for resistance. Join us on August 21st at 7:30 p.m. at the Commodore in Ybor City. Tickets are $10 in advance and $15 at the door. Doors open at 7. Space is limited, so buy your tickets now on WMNF.org.
Good day and welcome to Letters and Politics. I'm Mitch Jeserich. Today I'm very happy to welcome to this radio program renowned documentary filmmaker Lawrence Rees for a conversation about the psychology of Nazism. Over the past 3 decades, Lawrence Rees has made numerous award-winning documentary films on Nazi Germany. He's also written a number of books on the same topic, including his latest, which is called The Nazi Mind, 12 Warnings from History. Lawrence Rees, as I said, it is a very good pleasure to welcome you to this program. Thank you.
Thank you, Mitch.
Tell me about your experience over the years, a number of years, in interviewing former Nazis.
Well, it goes back 35 years, really. As you said, I mean, my background is as a historical filmmaker. After Oxford University, I wanted to make historical films. It's what I always wanted to do, historical documentaries. And I made my first film that involved dealing with former members of the Nazi Party, I guess probably 1989, 90 or something like that. And I'd been making history films kind of across the piece, if you like, about various topics. But I grew fascinated because I met a former member of the SS, and he didn't conform to what I'd imagined. And as a kind of trained as a journalist by the BBC and as a filmmaker, that's what always interests you. What interests you is when life doesn't conform to your preconceived idea of it. And this guy was a former member of the Waffen-SS. He'd served in a very nasty regiment indeed. He'd been imprisoned by Stalin after the war for a number of years, served in a gulag. He was one of the few who came out of there. Many of his comrades died down the mines there. And yet he was charming, very intelligent. He had gone on after the war to become a senior executive with a German car company when he got back from Stalin's camps in the 50s. And he, in many ways, seemed impressive. And until you got him onto the subject of anything to do with the war and the Nazi party belief. And then it was like, suddenly it was an alternate history. He was spouting all this nonsense about the war was the Jews' fault, and Churchill made a terrible mistake in not partnering with Nazi Germany because then we could both have ruled the world. Just a whole load of things that you just didn't compute at all. And this was many, many years after the war. And that really set me off on a journey to be really perpetually interested in Nazi mentalities. I'm interested in military history, of course, and you need to understand a bit of military history, but what primarily has interested me in my whole working life, and life generally, I suppose, is why are we who we are? And I find with history, particularly the history of the Second World War and the Nazis, it's a tremendous laboratory to try and explore those questions, particularly as it relates to Nazism, because they didn't conform. Neither he nor many of the former Nazis I met after that, when I started making a big 6-part series called Nazis Warning from History. I then did another big series with PBS and the BBC on Auschwitz. So I was meeting large numbers of former Nazis, and many of them didn't conform to what my idea of them would be. And so really trying to penetrate and understand those mentalities has kind of turned into, well, I hesitate to say life's work, but I mean, I hadn't imagined it would take 35 years, and I'm still doing it.
That's interesting to me about the man you are talking about. He was still a true believer after the war, and that is interesting to me because oftentimes we'll hold up Germany as this great example of how one addresses former atrocities that it has committed, and yet he was still, it sounds like, as you were saying.
I think this is where, with this latest book, I haven't, up until this latest book, I haven't really looked at how psychology can help this, because I've always been really suspicious of psychohistory. I mean, I'm incredibly against the attempt to psychoanalyze historical figures. Where psychology, for me, was tremendously valuable was evolutionary psychology and social psychology, which deal in tendencies, in human tendencies. They don't pretend to analyze an individual. They're about human tendencies. So one example being
groups, right? In groups.
Yeah, groups, but also evolutionarily wise. Why are you almost certainly more frightened of snakes than you are of buses? When living where you do, there's a lot more chance of you being killed by a bus than a snake. But you don't go out going, whoa, it's a bus. In a way you would with a snake. Well, because you're built thousands and thousands of years ago to immediately be concerned about snakes. So that's one example of the effect of evolutionary psychology on us. And so there was a huge help to me in understanding this. And where it goes back to the guy who I first met all those years ago is what a professor called Leon Festinger investigated really pioneeringly in the 1950s, was this notion that if you enter into a faith-based system through faith-based belief, you can't be persuaded out of a faith-based system by reasoned argument, because you didn't get into it by reasoned argument. And he did a famous investigation into people in the Midwest of America who thought spacemen were going to come down to save them from the apocalypse. And when the spacemen didn't turn up on the set date, there were, of course, a number of believers who stopped believing because they didn't turn up, it didn't work. But there was a core of people whose belief was intensified. And they came up with stuff like, they didn't turn up because they saw our faith in them, and so they've saved the world. So people should be thanking us for saving the world. So they just twisted the situation around to them. So when you talk about the guy I did and many of the former Nazis I met, what I was dealing with was this fundamental core. So there were large numbers of Germans after the war who renounced Nazism, and they renounced it primarily because there's another big social phenomenon that we're all aware of, which is, as a general rule, people just want to live their lives in peace and get on with things. And actually, if it means they've got to spout certain beliefs, they'll spout them. If they've got to say what they do, they want to actually not stand up and be martyrs and revolutionaries. They just want to get on with things and raise a family and have a nice time. But you're going to get, I think, in every political situation like that, a group of core believers who actually, it's so fundamental to the centrality of their self-belief that they're not about to change.
Other than the Nazism, which is not normal, but otherwise, and I think this is an important point that you're trying to make, these are otherwise pretty normal people.
Yeah, absolutely. If you look at, I found this not just with Nazis. I mean, I made a TV series and wrote a book about the Japanese mentality during the war, and met a number of Japanese soldiers and others who had committed the most terrible atrocities during the war, including a doctor who had taken part in the most horrendous medical experiments, operating on people without anesthetic and stuff like this. I mean, just the stuff of nightmares. And after the war, he became a much-loved general practitioner. You see that again and again and again, that people change as the situation changes. He may have had that some of these people may have had their core beliefs still, but there's one Hitler Youth person I met who in East Germany who had taken part in these pointless attacks against Russian tanks, Red Army tanks, as they were coming in 1945 towards his village. And he's 15 or something, I think, and throwing petrol bombs at them and stuff. And he completely committed Hitler Youth member, and he tripped up he says, and fell over, so he couldn't carry on with the attack. And then the Red Army soldiers came up, captured him, and that was what we wanted to talk to him about for the film. But afterwards, I asked him, well, what happened then? And he said, well, you won't believe it, but I immediately, they started talking to me about communism. I realized that Nazism was a disaster and communism was the way forward. So I became a devout communist and, rose to be mayor of this town and a very kind of prominent communist. I said, yeah, but communism collapsed 2 years ago here and it's a united Germany now. What happened? He said, well, you're not going to believe that. He had no sense of humor, by the way. This is not ironic. He said, you're not going to believe this, but almost immediately that the Berlin Wall fell, I realized I'd been deluded, that actually capitalism had to be the way forward, So he now had set up some kind of factory on the edge of town and was making money. Now, he didn't look at his life and go, I'm a hypocrite. He thought he'd had a series kind of awakenings as he went through it. And I think he much more represents the kind of generality of the human condition.
How do normal people then participate in something that we see as an atrocity?
Because they think what they're doing is right. And they think that what they're doing is right. If you take, for example, the core of a lot of the stuff that I dealt with was the horrendous, terrible murder and mistreatment of children. Because I was thinking, if you're going to get right down to kind of how low can human beings go, you've got to go pretty low to get involved in murdering and torturing children. And that was one aspect of all this that no matter how you look at this stuff, always upsets you. And I was talking to, we interviewed somebody who worked at Auschwitz, and we were talking about aspects of this. And he said, well, and I paraphrase, what you've got to understand is the enemy is not the children. The enemy is the blood in the children and the potential of the children to grow up and be dangerous. And indeed, Himmler had talked about something very similar in the Poznan speech, Poznan speech he gave in 1943, where he talked about we have to be so hard to kill the children. And we have to be hard because if we are weak and we only kill adults, then the children will grow up to be a race of avengers and come after our children. So by implication, you demonstrate your love for your children by killing these children over here. But having said that, there were a number of, I write in the book about the problems, I think substantial numbers of people working in the killing squads in the East, shooting people, had with killing women and children. And it's one of the reasons, one of the most important reasons that the gas chambers were developed in the way they did, not to kill people in larger numbers than could be killed by shooting. In actual fact, in a number of cases, Babi Yar and the Harvest Festival massacres, to name but two, they were killing more people per day by shooting than they ever did in the gas chambers of Auschwitz. What the gas chambers offered was massive distancing for the killers. And it only took a very small number of SS to be involved in the killing in the gas chamber compared to what was going on in the East.
Wow, that's interesting. I never really kind of made a connection from a gas chamber and that dynamic that you're laying out of distancing one from actually having to do the killing. And I couldn't help but think of drone warfare or...
Yeah, no. I interviewed an amazing guy, a really lovely guy, for the series I did about the war in the Pacific and the Japanese mentality. And I was looking at the area bombing of Japan by the Americans. And I'm not for a second equating the area bombing with the Holocaust. But the fact is that he talked about how he felt no issues at all with firebombing Japanese cities, because he looks down and he sees the fires, and he said we went back and got and had some had an orange juice, went to bed, and he suffered absolutely no stress of any kind with that kind of aerial bombing, despite the fact that he was involved, say, in the bombing of major Japanese cities where tens and tens of thousands of people women and children included, were killed. So clear, one of the warnings I talk about in the book is the effect of distancing. And of course, that's the equivalent of drones today, but also it's the as we move towards the more mechanization of warfare with robots on the battlefield and all of that stuff, of course, it's going to become much easier to kill. As I document in the book, there's all this psychological research showing that actually it's not easy psychologically for human beings to kill each other. I'm talking in generalities. I mean, I'm sure there's some psychopaths, there's individuals who can do it and discover incredible sadism and so on. But as a general rule, it's not easy for human beings to, in cold blood, kill each other face to face. And all of these devices help with that, for the killer's perspective.
For one group to commit an atrocity against another group, that one group needs to believe that that other group is a danger to it. And I guess we get into the psychological evolutionary psychology here. It doesn't even matter if it's right or wrong if they represent a threat, just if they are a threat. If they believe they're a threat, I mean.
And this is something you're in California, and one of the most helpful people to me, and I think one of the greatest intellectuals working in academia today, is a man called Professor Robert Sapolsky, who's professor of neuroscience at Stanford. And I was very lucky that he helped me with the book and educated me. And he talked about, in this respect, that this part of the brain called the amygdala, which is, we've all got one. If we didn't have one, and our ancestors hadn't had one, none of us would be here today. Because what this does is, bypassing kind of all other processes in the mind, it immediately alerts you to threat. So when you're outside and you see somebody coming towards you, it's complete, and it's a stranger, you're immediately on high alert. And it immediately makes you kind of, typically that fear or attack, or, but you've got a whole series of kind of visceral primal emotions in you with this, which is, what do I do? And in normal cases, what happens is you feel that instantly, and you have to feel that instantly, because if you processed it and it was a lion and you're on the savannah, you'd be eaten. So if we didn't have it, we wouldn't be here. The problem with it is that it's going to err. If you're on the savannah in Africa and the bush rustles, you're going to err on the side of it being a lion, because 99 times out of 100, it might be a dog from the village. But the one time it's a lion, it's going to eat you. So better to work on the basis it's a lion and then, chill afterwards. What someone like Hitler is doing in his early speeches is massively hyping up that amygdala emotion, which is saying, and because we have this extraordinary thing as human beings, which is you can excite stimulate that in human beings just by words. No other animal can do this. That you can talk about threat from people, and people have these emotions just from words. And Hitler did something even more so, which was essentially what he was saying to his audience. Was, I know you think these people are bad, but they're so much worse than you think. So he takes it and he's extending it. And in doing so, I think he knows none of this psychology, but in doing so, I think what he's effectively doing is trying to suppress or damp down the other bits of the brain that normally come along, the prefrontal cortex, which comes along and goes, analyzes and goes, take a chill pill. It's a dog. You just hey, don't worry. And it's a trying to keep this sense of anxiety and concern and fear and threat going, which I think many incredible sort of nationalist type reactionary dictators try and do. You can't, it's very hard to find one of them who doesn't have a dedicated enemy, and they need that enemy. They need the enemy because what the enemy is doing is constantly stimulating in people this feeling of, whoa. And it's much easier to unite your political group around hatred of an enemy than it is around anything they believe in. Because once you get into what people believe in, people can go, well, I'm not sure, do I believe that? That's a matter of nuance. Hating somebody, I mean, Hitler came across this little-known speech of Hitler's in, I think, 1926, where he said to his audience, you've got to understand, the only stable emotion is hate. So they're playing on hate, plus he is offering a vision at the end of it, which is this vision of the Volksgemeinschaft, a wonderful paradise where we're all going to live together, we're in racial purity and so on, which he can never really deliver. But psychologically, as I explain in the book, it helps that he can never really deliver it because everyone's always working towards it all the time. So the combination of those two things, trying to keep this hatred going for a particular group, and then also promising this sort of wonderful new world at the end of it that's going to take us, a struggle to get to. That combination, I think, goes to the core of a lot of what's going on here.
When Adolf Hitler rose to become Chancellor of Germany, he's still a minority figure in the country. But after he becomes Chancellor, through deal making with the conservatives, but after he becomes Chancellor, then people in droves begin joining the Nazi Party. What's going on there?
I think they're human beings. I mean, that's the issue. I mean, this is what we need to face about human beings. I mean, so many people try and join the Nazi Party in the spring of 1933, when Hitler becomes Chancellor on January the 30th, 1933. So many people subsequently, very, very quickly, want to join the Nazi Party, but they have to shut the membership. Now, do we seriously believe that all those people suddenly had a momentous road to Damascus conversion to Nazism overnight and realized, oh my God, no. I mean, some might, but surely the very, very serious suspicion is that it's telling us something about how most human beings, or many human beings certainly, would react, which is what you do, is you're looking after yourself and your family. You recognize which way the wind's going, and you need to know where you've got to be on board with. There was a very clever device they used, which was separating Hitler as much as possible from ordinary policy Nazism. So people were going around going, it's terrible what the Nazis are doing here on this, around the corner. But if only the Fuhrer knew, So it became a kind of useful safety valve, this sense that you could have immense popularity for Hitler, but underneath, actually a lot of kind of grumbling and concern about local Nazis.
Talk to me about the Nazis and young people and young people's minds and brains and the development of brains.
The bit of the brain I was talking about before, called the prefrontal cortex, which is the bit that analyzes stuff, right? It's also the bit that says, don't have that second piece of cake, you'll regret it. Because it's moderating impulse. It's a form of impulse control. And so there's always that. We know within us, we all have it within that kind of battle. There's always, and that's one of the reasons alcohol is such a problem, because you have, you go, I'm just going to have one glass of wine. You have one glass of wine and it weakens the prefrontal cortex. And so, but there you go. You've got this bit of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, which is vital. Otherwise, you just go around following your immediate instincts, and that's not a good place to be. But that bit of the brain is not fully formed until you're 25 years old. And I thought that's all very curious. And it was, in fact, Robert Sapolsky at Stanford who explained to me why we're set up that way. And the reason we're set up that way is, he put it this way. He said to me, imagine you're like 6 or 7 and you're told that your granny's coming round and your granny's going to give you the same toy that we gave you 6 weeks ago, okay? But she'll be really upset if you go, what are you doing? I've already got that. So can you just pretend that you haven't got that toy so you don't upset your granny? Apparently, for a child, that's a lot of computing space to work that out, because, and we've all seen it with small children, but they go, well, I've got it. I know you've got it, but you got it. You see, So as he put it, it takes a long time to work out the lies and hypocrisies of the world we live in and the subtleties of it. So if you actually had formed the prefrontal cortex at the time the visual cortex is formed, when you're very, very small, you simply wouldn't have the social cues and information to be able to develop all this. And what that means is that people up until the age of 25 are much more susceptible to fanaticism, but not just fanaticism like evil fanaticism. They're more likely, they can, as he said to me, they can be Mother Teresa as much. They're going to be. They've got a level of kind of sincerity and belief, like. I know this from my own kids and myself too. As I've never been as certain in my life as I was when I was 19 or 20. That's wrong. You're right. And and what seems to happen by the time you're about 25 is you've actually got a much more sophisticated understanding of the hypocrisies and nature of the world. So of course, if you're a dictator, fantastic to target people up to 25, because they're going to be more susceptible to your message. They're also, in the case of Nazism, going to be way more susceptible to a message which is essentially quasi-Darwinian, which is, if you want it, just take it. If you're stronger than them, you deserve it. Take what you want. Believe in these things. We've got to. It's like jungle fighting or whatever, and you're at your most primeval at that kind of age in terms of. It's why most people who are in the army at that age, you're at your absolute sort of physical peak, and also much more susceptible, I think. And so it's not. If you look at it, it's not just Hitler. They were the Hitler Youth. I mean, you've got Pol Pot in Cambodia. Many of his worst killers were people in their teens, or Mao. I don't know. How could you have had the Cultural Revolution without the students that were running it? So it's not an uncommon thing once you understand this to spot how these kinds of authoritarian figures are targeting people that kind of age.
Lawrence Rees, I want to be careful in asking this next question because you're very deliberate in this book, The Nazi Mind, to not talk about any particular leader today.
Yeah.
However, you do see it important enough to write a book now about the Nazi mind, and that way the subtitle is 12 Warnings from History. So I'll let you explain, but it seems to me there is purpose for this book for this moment that we are living in.
Absolutely. Although, I mean, somebody said to me, I delivered this book, I don't know, a year ago to the publisher, and they said, that is so prescient of you to know that Trump was going to get elected. And I go, it's all about Trump. And I go, are you kidding? I would have put any money or any odds that he's not going to get elected. I mean, for God's sake, look at the guy. Look at the sex court case civil case in New York, or the money case, or the. I mean, for God's sake, of course, he's not going to be re-elected. It's a joke. How can that happen? Ha ha. So I'm the worst kind of predictor going forward. I mean, in terms of actually specific political predictions, I mean, talk to me and then bet on the reverse happening, I mean, so one of the reasons I look only in the past, I guess. But secondly, I didn't do it because what I wanted to happen was people in each individual territory the book's going to, and it's selling all over the world, but people in each individual territory who know their own contemporary political history way better than I do, for them to read it and be able to go, God, what that really reminds me of? because they then will feel that way more powerfully than if I'd spoon-fed it, and they'll feel it way more powerfully because in their minds they've made the connection. So for those two reasons, I didn't do it, and I've been gratified that in pretty much everywhere people have thought that was the right choice.
So I had that experience. Can I tell you about it and read
Sure.
it? And you can respond however you wish, or even not respond to what I'll say. But especially about the part concerning conspiracy theories and one group having to see the other group as a threat. Doesn't matter if it really is a threat or not. They just have to see that group as a threat. It just took me to a conversation I had with a family member who put out on social media his support for taking due process rights away from undocumented immigrants in the United States. And I responded to him on social media, which I usually don't do, but I did, because I was like, you do know that writ of habeas corpus, due process is sort of the foundations of our legal system going back to 1215, and the Magna Carta, and this is inherently anti-Americanism, and his response to me was, what are you going to do when, and these are his words, an illegal kills one of your family members?
Yeah.
And I was just like, my God, man, what are we talking about here? This is crazy talk.
Yeah. I mean, but that you have to see that. That is deeply a primitive response that predates the goes right back to what I'm talking about with us all on the savannah. We were, generally speaking, a very violent lot, and you looked entirely. We were working on the basis of them and us. And I when I was running history programs at the BBC, I very nearly commissioned and wanted to see made a film about the combination of the Declaration of Independence, the American Constitution, the Bill of Rights, because I saw in those the most important documents ever written, because what they was an attempt to create a wonderful new society independent of God, independent of a supreme being telling you what to do, hence we the people. And I thought this is, and the Enlightenment. So it's the very foundation of America is the triumph of the Enlightenment, the triumph of it. It's no accident that the French Revolution, which follows, is not aping this necessarily, but they're certainly informed by it. It's an extraordinary thing that happened in your country, particularly the character individually of Washington. So I wanted to do this as this great film saying, look at the checks and balances put in America now with that have been there for so long. And I'm writing at the minute about Roosevelt and his difficulties with Congress and Senate and everything during the war. It feels unbelievably quaint. It feels like I'm writing about a whole other universe compared to this. But I'm jolly glad I didn't make the film, because it just shows you. I mean, that so much for checks and balances in many cases, which leads me to the central conclusion I start the end of the book with, which is what I've learned is everything's fragile, often a great deal more fragile than we think. And the notion that America is having these issues, America, the great beacon of the Enlightenment. I mean, speaking from someone here in thousands of miles away in London, but the notion that these things can be talked about in America, if they can be talked, if Americans who I respect can tell me this is happening in America, where else could it happen? And the answer is absolutely anywhere, because America was the one place that I was certain it couldn't happen. I'm not saying you're going down the road of Nazis. I'm not saying you're going down the road of dictatorship. I'm not, but the story you've just described from your own experience, fits into that pattern I was just describing.
Lawrence Rees has been our guest. Again, Lawrence Rees is an award-winning documentary filmmaker and historian, and he has joined us for a conversation on his book. It's called The Nazi Mind, 12 Warnings from History. Lawrence Rees, I've enjoyed our conversation very much, and I thank you.
Thanks, Mitch. I've enjoyed it too.
And you're listening to Letters and Politics on listener-supported KPFA in Berkeley, KFCF in Fresno, and KPFK in Los Angeles. I am Mitch Jeserich, and I do come to you on the third day of a very short summer fun drive that my home station, KPFA, will wrap up by the end of next week. This is the time that we come to you asking you for your financial support to make programs like this one and everything else that the radio station does that you're listening to right now brings to you throughout the week and throughout the month and throughout the year, whether it be special broadcasts or whether it be daily broadcasts like this one, where we try to, on a good day, look into history and just see what history can tell us about this moment that we're currently living through, because that's always what history does, because nothing comes out of a vacuum. And the psychology of people are still largely intact over the many thousands of years now. I am asking for a contribution that you can afford, that is according to your means and that you feel good about as you go upon your day. It's $25, $50, $75, $100. Really what I ask for is a contribution that is according to your means. We do have thank you gifts this hour. First, the book, The Nazi Mind, 12 Warnings from History by Lawrence Rees, is available for a contribution of $175. This week, we've also done shows about the Red Scare, about the influence of Karl Marx in America, especially with the early Republican Party, which I did not know a whole lot about. That was yesterday's show with Andrew Hartman. The day before was with Clay Risen on Tuesday, in which we talked about the history of the Red Scares and how the Red Scares of the 1940s and 50s was really in reaction to the rise of a powerful progressive coalition of the left in the 1930s. Again, history matters on this show, and this is what we try to dive into. We are offering each of these books as well in this fund drive. Karl Marx in America for a contribution of $200. Red Scare by Clay Risen for a contribution of $160. We're also offering the Letters and Politics U.S. History Collection, which is a collection of interviews that we've curated and put together and put in chronological order according to time, in which we talk about. We send you a link to all of those interviews that are now up there available. That's for $100. If you were to get these all individually, it would come up to well over $600. But we're also offering them, all of what I just mentioned right now, together, all four, those three books and the Letters and Politics U.S. History audio collection for a discounted rate of $500. The phone number is, for KPFA listeners and KFCF listeners, 1-800-439-5732, 1-800-439-5732, and online at kpfa.org. There you can look at all the thank you gifts. Again, I'm not asking that you pledge for a thank you gift specifically. I'm asking you to pledge to support the programming we do here, to support the radio station that makes a program like this possible and everything else that you hear here. Make sure we remain on the air in a time that is very perilous for that of public broadcasting. And this is very true for our friends in Southern California listening to KPFK in Los Angeles. The phone number there is 818-985-5735. That's the number you call to make a donation for KPFK, 818-985-5735, and online at kpfk.org. I'm very happy to say that yesterday we did make our $2,000 challenge that came in from Nizar. So Nizar, thank you. Thank you for doing that. Thank you for stepping up. And that's what we need. We're going to need a lot of $25 and $50 contributions because that's what most people can probably pull off. But we also need some larger ones. There are going to be fewer of them. But if we get, a $500 or $1,000 or sometimes even $2,000, it just helps tremendously. And I don't ask for that if you can't do it. I just ask for what you can do, what you can reasonably do without having to go into your bank account to make sure you could do it. Because I don't want that. We want you to be good. And we want you to feel good about the donation you made. And if you can't make that donation, we're glad you're here. And if you can, know that you're doing it so that others can, who may not be able to do it right now, still have access to this radio station. Access isn't about your ability to be able to pay like a streaming service. Access here is about a community supporting something to make sure it's here for everyone. It's public. It's part of the common good. It's part of the commons. And this is what's under attack right now in our daily life, in our public life, is the common, is shared resources. We rely on you, not the government. And that's why I'm asking for your support today. I also need to say this very quickly because we did get an incredibly sizable, generous donation from Larry in Piedmont. I said we made that challenge yesterday. Larry made the challenge by himself. He donated $2,500. He did make it a challenge. And I like to think people hear other people do it, and they're like, well, maybe I can help too, because what that means is if it's a challenge, and if we could raise $2,500 this hour, that means, oh my goodness, that means $5,000. And that's a big deal to me right now, and a big deal to this show, and a big deal to this radio station. So the challenge begins now. We don't have a lot of time, but we can make it. It could be 25 people donating $100. It could be 50 people donating $50. It could be any kind of combination. For KPFA listeners, the phone number is, this is also true for KFCF listeners, 1-800-439-5732, 1-800-439-5732, and online at kpfa.org. In Southern California, the number is 818-985-5735, 818-985-5735, and online at kpfk.org. You can also donate in monthly installments. If you do want to make a $200 contribution, if you do want to make a $175 contribution and get this book, The Nazi Mind, you know, you can do it in installments. You could do it in $20. You could become a sustainer. Maybe donate $10 a month to this radio station, or $15 a month to this radio station, or $20 a month to this radio station. It's far cheaper than what I pay for any video streaming services, or even, you know, most audio services as well. I mean, it's just the world we live in now. But the thing is about those services is if you don't pay for them, you're cut off. You'll never get cut off here, because I'm not asking you to buy this. These are thank you gifts, sort of price ranges. Like, hey, if you can make this $175 contribution, here's this book that we'd love to give to you for that contribution. Of course, you can get it a whole lot cheaper somewhere else, hopefully at a bookstore, right? But it's sort of a reference point of, hey, if you can do that much, we'll send this to you. And it's our thank you to you. But what you're really doing is you're supporting something. You're not buying anything. You're supporting. There's a difference, and it's an important difference. And supporting is important because it's through this act of supporting that we build community, that we actually build something that we feel good about and be a part of something that we can feel good about and be connected to. It's important to be connected, especially when you think you're living through difficult times. It's important to be connected. It's easy to isolate oneself and turn away. I feel that. It's easy. I don't mean to say it's easy as though it's the easy, right? I mean, you do feel it too. You're like, I shouldn't, but I don't know. So many people are telling me now I can't watch the news. I fear that's how it works. I fear that's how it works. It becomes so horrendous that we just have to turn away. Well, I'm asking you not to turn away from this radio station right now. The first public broadcaster born in 1949, the Pacifica Radio Network. Do you know what Pacifica meant? It wasn't because it was born out of the town of Pacifica. which I used to think. It's like, oh, what, why Pacifica? No, it means pacifism. The radio station was born from pacifists who believed in peace, who believed in media and talking about the world, not at its lowest common denominator, not at what would just drive the most ears to this station so that we can make money off advertisements. They rebelled against that. That was the birth of public broadcasting, and it was this station, this network. I'm asking you to support that today. So again, if you're listening to KPFA in Berkeley and KFCF in Fresno or in the Bay Area or in the Central Valley, the phone number you're going to call is 1-800-439-5732. 1-800-439-5732 and online at kpfa.org. In Southern California, the number is 818-985-5735. 818-985-5735 and online at kpfk.org. As you know, Congress, Republican-controlled government right now, completely slashed their direct funding for public broadcasting. Now, again, I said this yesterday, we were cut off a long time ago. We've had to learn how to operate without support from the federal government in that way, from direct money coming in many years ago. And we learned how to do it. But what we won't be able to do is to support this radio station without listener support. And, you know, I used to say one of the talking points is if I'm not anti-government, so I'm not against taxation. I'm not anti-government, but I'm very much pro-good government. I'm pro-Social Security, Medicare. Want them to be better. Medi-Cal, you name it. But, you know, sometimes I would say if you want to divert some of the tax money away from the military machine, which your tax money also goes towards, it is a double-edged sword, well, you could donate to KPFA or KPFK or KFCF. Well, now that the federal government has, again, really stopped funding that comes from the Corporation of Public Broadcasting, a quasi-government agency, also a corporate one. It's complicated. If you want to say, I still want to support this radio station, you could do so because it is still tax deductible, a donation. So you can still, with a direct contribution to this radio station. Loves the shows. you don't mind me saying that.
Hi, this is Tom Scherberger, former host of WMNF's Wavemakers. I hope you'll join me for the launch of a new in-person speaker series called Wavemakers Live. I'll be your host for lively conversations with people making a difference around Florida and Tampa Bay. We kick things off August 21st with WMNF's own Nadine Smith. You know Nadine as the host of the Wide Awake America Public Affairs Show, but she's also the co-founder of Equality Florida, where she's been fighting for equal rights for 30 years and was one of Time Magazine's 100 most influential people in the world. We'll talk about how the right-wing agenda nationally has its roots in Florida and how Florida can provide a blueprint for resistance. Join us on August 21st at 7:30 p.m. at the Commodore in Ybor City. Tickets are $10 in advance and $15 at the door. Doors open at 7. Space is limited, so buy your tickets now on WMNF.org.
This is WMNF Tampa, 88.5 on the left side of your dial. Best little radio station on planet Earth. Stay tuned for The Scoop. After that, DJ Jimmy's in with 2 hours of great music, so don't go anywhere.